Welcome everybody, my name is David Wood. It's my pleasure and privilege to chair London Futurists. We have meetings on all kinds of topics. Some of them we visit quite often, such as the future of artificial intelligence, the future of healthcare, the future of politics, the future of employment. But we're focusing today on a topic that actually we should put more attention on, which is how can we become collectively more intelligent? How can we access more reliably the knowledge which is latent in our communities or in our teams, but which often doesn't get a chance to come to the surface? And particularly, what role can we use for technology to help bring about the wisdom of the team or the wisdom of the crowd rather than the anarchy or the madness or the confusion of the team or the crowd? If I look back at my own career, many of the things that I feel proudest about and give me the greatest pleasure were things that were not accomplished just by me as an individual, but came out of what I might call a smart or empowered committee or a team of people, which we built on each other's insights. We had diverse opinions. Some of us were focused on design, some of us were focused on efficiency, some of us were focused on performance, some of us were focused on robustness, some of us were focused on partnerships and collaboration, and out of all of that, when it worked, we managed to produce something that was much better and much smarter than we could have done as individuals. But equally, when I look back at my career and find things that I'm disappointed about, it's often because that team thinking broke down and our organisation became dominated by a few loud voices that were very powerful and very perceptive, but weren't quite right anymore. And we got stuck in a bit of inertia, and we lacked the fluidity of a genuine collaborative intelligence. Sometimes organisations are in the situation of saying, if only we knew what we knew. Often there are answers to problems, there are answers to how to take advantage of opportunities in that organisation. It's just that management, the people taking decisions, are not aware of that knowledge. And the people even who have that knowledge aren't aware of how important and how critical that insight may be. So what we heard today is to try and surface this collective knowledge. Rather, what we heard today is to look at tools and technology that might surface this collective knowledge more reliably and take us from being arguably collectively mediocre in our intelligence sometimes and bring us into a true collectively intelligent team, species, civilization. And to help us through this, we're very fortunate to have somebody who's dedicated his career to this exact topic. He'll tell a bit more about his own career, I'm sure, the various roles that empowered, inspired teams have played in his career, but he's now running a company, developing a tool, in interaction with a whole bunch of different potential clients. We're giving him feedback, and we're very fortunate to be given a bird's eye view as to how this technology is on the point of breaking through and potentially being very transformational. So let's welcome Joe Kay.
Thanks very much, David. Thank you all for coming out on the sort of first real day of spring. I sort of thought there was absolutely no way that anyone was going to turn up when we've actually got some sunshine for once. So thank you all from me. Today I will talk about collective intelligence. I'll start off talking about the influences that got me to where I am. I'll do the present, where we are with my company, Enswarm. I'll keep that very brief. I told David I was definitely not going to turn this into an Enswarm commercial, but we kind of need to show you what we're doing today so that we can talk about the whole reason of the group and talk about the future. And specifically within the future, some of the big aspects that I think that what we class as team intelligence, the influence that we can have on politics and artificial intelligence, two of the big topics that we talk about at the Futurists. So let's first talk about the past and my first career. So I was in the military, and so what I'll talk to you about briefly is high-performing team culture and thinking structures within the military. So first I'm going to take you back to 2001, and it's the sort of my story. I just left university where I'd studied industrial design, and I'd very much enjoyed being in the Officer Training Corps at university, and I was very passionate about teamwork. So I decided I was going to go off and join the army. Here I am at the top of the Twin Towers in September 2001 with my best friend Rich Webb, just before we were going to go off and join the army 2 weeks later. So 2 weeks later we were in Sandhurst. We joined on September the 9th, 2001, and of course on September the 11th, 2001, the Twin Towers came down. So we had joined to do peacekeeping, and that's what we thought our career was going to be about. I was passionate about teamwork, and we were going to go and do this peacekeeping stuff. But 2 days after joining, the situation subtly changed, and they said, well, you're all going to be going off to war. Now, whatever your thoughts are politically about that, we'd kind of already signed on the dotted line, and once you're in, you don't really get the choice. So we can debate the politics about why, whether Iraq and Afghanistan were a good idea later, if you'd like. But I went. I learned a hell of a lot about teamwork in the army, and specifically, I suppose, it was interesting talking to some of these guys. So my job, I was a helicopter pilot. And so we were in a relatively high-performing team ourselves, I would have said, with lots of diverse people, engineers, intelligence analysts, and pilots. But then we also did a lot of work with the Special Forces, and it was a really interesting time for me. I would go and do a mission. I'd go and do missions with them for a sort of a week. Learn everything, see how they plan, see their sort of team cultures, and what actually worked for them as a team, before moving on onto the next group. This is 10 years ago in Afghanistan. I was on an attachment with the US forces. So in 2008, while the financial crash was happening, I was on the Pakistan border for a year. And this is where I'd learned my initial main lessons about teamwork. So I thought it was going to be Mr. Teamwork. I was still passionate about it. I had all of these lessons that I'd learned from working in my own teams and then with the Special Forces. And I thought I was going to leave the army and do something with that, but I didn't quite know what. And I'll come back to it. Military team thinking, though. Some of the things that I want to come back to. Within the army, we go through an operational cycle. So we will try and observe what's going on, orientate ourselves, make decisions as a team, and then act. That then feeds back round, and you just do that cycle again and again. And we used to do that every day in Iraq and Afghanistan. The other lessons that I want to bring out. When we're into the position where we're going to actually make a decision, we use this process called the combat estimate. Now, don't worry too much about what the questions are, but it's a set of 7 questions that you ask yourself in any situation that can lead to a more creative outcome. And you can use this. You can use this in war, you can use this in any situation you like. You can use it in 5 minutes, or you can use it in 5 months before you go and do a mass air assault into a whole region in Afghanistan. We would use these 7 questions for every single operation that we did, big or small. Let's, again, not worry about them, what they are too much. If we want to dig into it in the second hour, we can, but we've got a lot to get through. So the lessons I've learned from 11 years in the military: high performance in humans, in human teams, takes a lot of training. There are 2 areas in work where we get the opportunity to take time out. In sports teams and the military do not have to perform to their optimal all the time. In business you do, and that's a significant difference. We can spend a lot of our time training. The operational cycle is applicable in any situation, in your life, in business. Open questions can be used as a handrail, and we can come back to that. And also, teams need some form of vision, some form of strategic end state to work towards. again, potentially a problem in Iraq and Afghanistan. But this brings us forward to 2010. So I was back from my final tour of Afghanistan, and I was doing a master's with the military and read this book called The Smart Swarm by Peter Miller, all about how bees and ants evolved to think together. Which brings us on to my second influence for team intelligence, and really it was my first inspiration. So, swarms solve problems. Swarms of bees. They solve problems like, where is the food? Where should we live? Now bees, I'll try and do this very quickly. If you get a swarm of bees, and there you'll see them, there could be a big swarm of bees that was just sort of hanging out here, and it just looked like they're not really doing much. What they're actually doing is half of the original colony has moved to a new position, and then they're doing a form of collective thinking. They're looking for, where should we live? If there are two, let's say that there are two hive locations. One is an optimum hive location over where David is, and the other is a sort of pessimistic, not so good location where Jenny is over here. If the swarm's in the middle, the swarm will then send scouts out. They'll come back, and bees will find these potential places where they could live. If they will come back from one where it's okay, the bees will communicate to the rest of the colony, or to the rest of the swarm, that there's an okay version, there's somewhere okay to live over here. And they do that through the medium of dance, which I'm not going to try and do today. They call it the waggle dance. And potentially they'll say, oh, there's an okay location over here, and one more bee will go back and check it out. If there's an optimum location over where David is, the scout bees will come back and they will go absolutely crazy. And potentially 3 bees will then fly back over and check that out. So of course what then happens, this process repeats. Series of 1 bees come back from over here, series of 3 bees come back from where David is. And before you know it, most of the bees have gone and checked out the optimum location. They come back, they hit a critical mass, and the entire swarm goes and moves in to the optimum location where David is. And bees always, I think the stat is up in the 90%, that they will always, 90% of the time, they will find the best possible new hive location. So they're very good at making decisions, the individual scouts. And this intelligence aggregation is when they hit this critical mass. So, lessons from swarming. Within Smart Swarm, they talk about, and swarm theory, most of the time they talk about how swarm theory can be used within computer algorithms, and they also look at our human behaviour, for example on email, and apply swarm thinking to it, to explain. They look at it and say, oh, you know, humans are swarming, we just don't really realise it through our sort of email communication, for example. I looked at it from a different way. From a team perspective, because that was my thing, I was really inspired, and I thought that bees and ants actually evolved to think together. And in effect, they are the highest performing teams on the planet. So, that got me into wondering how humans evolved to think, which brings us into human evolution and cognitive bias. So, let's look at this. 400 million years ago, us and bees went separate ways. 5 million years ago, so quite a jump there, we see the first human-like apes. The first stone tools, 3.3 million years ago. I mean, this is just not to scale at all, by the way. 1.5 million years ago, the first fire use, but then it took us 1 million years to actually work out how to cook on it. Homo sapiens, our current form, 300,000 years ago. The first language, only 100,000 years ago. 10,000 years ago was the first farming, and then the first metalwork at 7,000 years ago, which brought the end of the Stone Age, where we did most of our evolution over 2.6 million years. First cities, 5,000 years ago, and then I can't really cram in all of the stuff that's happened just in our lifetimes, but you can see it's sort of this exponential curve. So what about the thinking? How did that evolve? And this got me into thinking fast and slow in the world of behavioural economics and cognitive bias that we hear about increasingly in the news at the moment. See, behavioural psychologists will say that we are predictably irrational as a species. This is the way that we have evolved to think. There are 150 biases. This is an open a Creative Commons poster that you can get just on, you can download this. It's from Wikipedia. It's well worth having a look at, and we'll dive into a few of them.
Download from there?
Sorry? From Wikipedia, that is, yeah. And it's, under license under Creative Commons. You can buy a poster of it I'm like a cognitive bias poster salesman at the moment. So, but why do we think like this? The current thinking is that human biases are features, they are not flaws. They were optimized for millions of years of our evolution, but the problem is that now, in the modern workplace or in the modern life, we've advanced so rapidly in the last few years that evolution can't keep up. So if we dive into some of these, let's just give you a couple of examples. So we imagine things and people that we're familiar with or fond of as better. So think about over several million years, if you were in a tribe, that's an evolutionary advantage. If you thought that the other tribe was better, you'd probably go and join that other tribe and your tribe wouldn't survive. So over years, the tribes that stayed together and continued and survived actually started thinking that you're better off staying in your tribe. Now think about that in the modern era, where we're not in tribes in our work. What we want is thought diversity. But if it's another team from a different country, we just inherently don't trust them. And you see this in all walks of life. You don't trust other teams like your team. Your team's always best. I've highlighted this one as a bit more of an unusual one, but it's quite interesting from a futurist perspective, that we project our current mindset and assumptions onto the past and the future. Again, from an evolutionary perspective, that was good. I mean, if you consider that it took millions of years for technology to change when we were evolving, but now technology is changing every couple of months. There's always something new. So this was an advantage while we were evolving, but now it's a massive disadvantage to us. There's also this need to act fast, and to avoid mistakes, we preserve autonomy and group status and avoid irreversible decisions. Great, again, when you're evolving over millions of years, much more likely to stay alive, but when you're having to deal with digital transformation and you do need to do something different, but you want to preserve your status in the company and the group, it's much easier just to go along with the general, what you might perceive to be the general consensus, and to not necessarily do what you know you should do. And all of this leads to the phenomenon that loosely gets termed as groupthink, which is part of what we solve. In effect, unfortunately, humans, to a certain extent, are fairly sheep-like. But there is some technology to reduce bias. In the 1970s, the top 5 US orchestras only had 5% women. They started doing blind auditions. And then by 97, there were 27% were female, and that is going up all the time. I mean, it's simple technology, but it's very effective. So, when we look back, humans are predictably irrational. I think we can't fight our evolution. We can use technology to reduce our biases. David's already mentioned it then, wisdom of the crowd, because technology to reduce biases, people normally come, technology to make crowds wise, we normally come to this. And the term was coined by James Surowiecki in his book, The Wisdom of Crowds. Now within that book, he said that there were 4 key criteria to make up a wise crowd. Diversity of opinion. People need to be independent. They need to make recommendations without knowing what other people have said. The group needs to be decentralized. There can't be any form of hierarchy. And there needs to be some form of mechanism, like the bees, to aggregate the individual wisdom of the members of that group or members of the crowd for the crowd to be wise. The example that always gets trotted out, and part of the original inspiration for this, was Sir Francis Galton's 1906 experiment, where they decided they were going to try and accurately weigh an ox at a country fair. They got experts to try and do it individually, and then they got the members of the general public to guess the weight. They took the mean. They got the closest. So this always gets trotted out, that all crowds are wise, and essentially means that if you're in some form of meeting and you're trying to guess the weight of estimate the weight of an ox, your answer is going to be subject to bias. If you've got diverse independent opinions and then some form of aggregation mechanism, you'll get this unbiased, wise answer. But it doesn't work in all situations. Lessons that I've taken from this, and we can dig into it afterwards, is that crowds are only wise when all the criteria are met, which is extremely rare. What it always comes down to is what is the motivation of that crowd, which brings us on to motivation. Collective insect motivation. They evolved to be purely motivated by the survival of the colony. Those same bees, they will sting you and die without thinking about it for the protection of the colony. Whereas humans, we're motivated by ourselves in this in order. And again, we won't go too much into Maslow, but you go from the base up. You first need food, water, and shelter and warmth, then safety, then belonging, and it's only when we've got this stuff sorted out that we come to London Futurists and sort of start working out about self-esteem and self-actualization. I'm willing to bet that none of you are homeless, because you're going to be worrying about this stuff, not the stuff up there. Of course, these days we also need Wi-Fi on there as well. And that's the main thing we all care about, but let's just keep it light-hearted. Human motivation is always tied to some benefit for the individual or our families. And this conversation can get quite dark about what you are willing to die for, but there's always some benefit to the individual or their family. So let's carry on looking at motivation. And swarms versus herds. And this is where things might get a little bit controversial, because I think differently about this than most other people. Collectively intelligent insects swarm, whereas mammals, including us, birds and fish, herd. I know they're called different things for the different species, but they're the same. Within the swarming, behaviour is used to solve problems for the collective. Within herding, this behaviour is purely to prevent the death of individuals. So we already talked about the scouts leaving the swarm to go and gather intelligence, but within herds, individuals stay grouped together for safety. Individuals in swarms make decisions about what's best for the colony as a whole, but individuals within herds make decisions about what's best for themselves. It's subtle, but it's really different. And no one really talks about that stuff, so we can argue about this afterwards if you like. And there's a real problem with this, because we split 400 million years ago, and humans have naturally got a herding instinct in us. When we do things without really thinking, just based upon what the group is doing or the collective is doing, we are herding. That's why we get these crowd disasters when people are just running. We panic and we run too. That's why we get bubbles in stock markets, and it's why on social media things can go viral and things can also get nasty, which brings us more into the final influence in social media. From my Facebook page, and Mr. Mark Zuckerberg going off to Congress this week. Social media is all about how popular is this opinion, with its 254 likes, 33,000 comments and 11,000 shares. What we are looking at there is how popular is a piece of information, what's trending. When I see what's trending, I look at what does the herd think. And it's there. This is what I should be looking at, delivered up from me, Joe K. So let's try linking some of these. What's Facebook's algorithm? What is its motivation? All it wants you to do is that. It doesn't care about anything else. So all it's going to do is keep delivering me up the things that I like and David up the things that he likes. We end up in a filter bubble. Let's look at our requirements for wise crowds versus herding and social media. So we looked at the diversity of opinion, independence, decentralization and aggregation. So on social media, do you get diversity of opinion? No, you get this lack of diversity. You unfriend people that you don't like. Oh, I'm just going to unfollow you. I don't like hearing that. Let's make my filter bubble work. It polarizes us. There's no independence in social networks. You get your content is served up to you based upon what the algorithm wants to do to get more of that. There's no decentralization. There is still a hierarchy within social media. This is why you get social media influencers, and people actually make a living on getting people in. They're acting on this herding instinct that we've got. And there's no aggregation method. All we're looking at is what's shared most quickly. And it's all overt and open. There's nothing behind the scenes that is saying, let's take these diverse opinions and deliver it up, and that's the overall answer. So social media is the polar opposite to a wise crowd. So 8 years of conclusions. Swarms of bees, flocks of birds, schools of fish, herds of sheep. That is not the same as that, and no one's saying it. Higher level collective intelligence is possible. Insects do it, but we just didn't evolve the ability to. We can't change how we evolve to think. We can't remove our cognitive biases, and we're not going to change our motivations individually. I'm still going to care about myself, my wife, my kids. I'm sure you're very nice, but that's not how we're motivated. We evolved to think as individuals, but cooperate in teams, and therefore what I'm really concerned about with the future of collective intelligence is specifically what we term team intelligence. We know that technology can amplify or neutralize human cognitive bias. Team intelligence technology to neutralize bias must conform to wisdom of the crowd principles. But the one thing that humans are really good at is that we can overcome evolution with tools. So we didn't evolve the ability to be able to fly, but the Wright brothers could see birds flying around, and they designed the tool, the aeroplane, for us to be able to fly just as well as any bird. So with all of this, we determined that the requirements for enhancing team intelligence with tools come down to two things. One, we need to neutralize the effects of human bias. And secondly, we need to motivate individuals to work towards team success. So that brings us to the present. With the various different influences, we've started a business called Enswarm. Obviously, Enswarm with the original inspiration of the name, because you can enswarm your problems, but also because we're trying to enhance the intelligence of teams. We are a team intelligence platform. And we exist to transform the way that teams think together. We need to look at what teamwork then really means. We say that all teams need some sort of vision, some sort of strategic end state. And we achieve that strategic end state by doing three things: team thinking, team planning, and team doing. In your work, I'm fairly sure at the moment, you'll go and you'll do most of your team thinking in meetings. We'll ask questions of each other, discuss ideas, and decide on your actions. You can then go and schedule them and decide that David's going to do this work, Joe's going to do this work. And then you go and actually do some team doing and build towards your vision. And typically we'll do all of that in an office. Now technology, there's a whole load of technology out there that is replacing various different aspects of that. Chat platforms are replacing the office. There's a whole load of tech to be able to actually help you do your work, to get paid. There's lots to help you plan, but the tech to help you do your team thinking, all it's really done is taken the meeting and brought it online. And we say that meetings haven't changed in millennia. We've just replaced a campfire for a table. So if we were objective, meetings would be a fine way for us to, as teams of people, decide on the best possible actions to take. But the reality of them is that it's different, and this is where our human biases come back into play. So meetings get dominated, as David was saying, by some people while others feel unable to contribute. Ideas are influenced by politics, whether it's office politics or with a large P. Actions are driven by groupthink, and we're totally overloaded by meetings. So, Enswarm, where we're different, we remove the bias from team thinking, and we motivate individuals towards team success. And we're a digital tool that guides teams of people through the team thinking process of questions to ideas and then ideas to action. So we say if you've got a question to answer, you don't need to organise a traditional meeting. You can Enswarm it first. You do that from our website, and I'll skip through this bit. You go into an Enswarm, create a new Enswarm, ask your question, invite your team. Your team will put here. Oh, this looks awful on this screen, I'm afraid. And then we end up within an Enswarm where you're having effectively a team meeting. We use a mind map interface because we don't want to lose information off the top of the screen. We're not wedded to it, but as Phil will probably attest to, we need to be able to remove, to change interfaces to remove human bias. And the startups in this space, of which ThoughtSpace is one, we're all working on different types of user interface, not social media based ones. With a mind map, you can look at one different leg of a conversation or another, and there's no precedent. There's no precedent, or precedent's the wrong word. There's no specific order or priority to a conversation. It just happens in the order it happens. Here's how it works, and here's where we're a bit different. On the surface, we use interface anonymity. We hide who says what. This is to take out the bias. And we do this purely the ideas phase. Behind the scenes, everything that gets said gets recorded onto people's profiles so that they can be recognised for it afterwards. We then get people to rate and tag each bit of content without knowing who else is saying what. So there's no trending, you don't understand, or you can't see what anyone else is doing. And then you can add your own content. You put your ideas in, and you can decide whether this is a particular action from your perspective or not. But you can't rate your own. So what we end up with is this swarm-like effect where everyone's putting in their own content, they're having a conversation, they don't know who's saying what. You rate and tag without knowing what anyone else is rating and tagging. And then you can switch yourself into analysis mode. At that point, we've got the aggregation mechanism that takes everyone's individual input, puts it back together, and displays it back to the team in several different methods. It will give you two things. It gives you what are the top actions, what should this team do, what are the answers to your questions from the team's perspective. But critically, for the motivation side, it also gives you who was the most engaged and who has added the most value. And that element of putting the motivation back into it so that you can do better as an individual by working towards team success is what is making us a little bit different. So, promising not to spend too much time talking about Enswarm. What we do is focusing on developing the best ideas together, gives you better actions faster, and we give people the ability to make an impact, get recognised for the impact that they've made, which leads to a reduction in office politics and an increased engagement within the team. So it leads to team success, which leads to higher morale. And in the army, we always used to talk about the most important thing was morale. You can achieve anything with a team that is happy. But here's where we are. We're kind of at the right part of the stage with team intelligence. So what I want to talk about now is what happens in 100 odd years when we've taken that initial forays into flight, and now we can fly directly to Australia as of last month, I believe. So with the last sort of 15 minutes, this is where it gets a little bit more interesting. We've got out of the Enswarm commercial. The vision for the future, where I think team intelligence can really take us. I think it's got two potential massive impacts for the future of humanity. The first being within politics, and the second within the field of artificial intelligence. Now, both of these, I'm conscious that in the room there are people who are far more expert at this. So we're going to have a good discussion in a minute, I'm sure. But I'll tell you what I think, and then open up the floor to questions and points. Let's start with politics first. So again, I think that that team intelligence technology, with the two aspects that team intelligence technology does, is in neutralising effects of human bias and motivating individuals towards team success, is critical for the future of politics. And here's why. This is the existing way that the existing technology of politics in this country is based on systems that are a couple of 100 years old. To vote, members of the House of Commons will actually walk into pens, pass whips. Now that is a system that is fraught with bias. The party political system is tribal. We don't really think about what we're doing, or the politicians, their primary, the primary way that they will always vote is with their party. They have to be a rebel to vote against something that they don't agree with. And MPs ultimately are motivated by re-election. That taps into their core survival mechanism for themselves and their family. It's broken. I don't have all the answers, but this system doesn't work. Here's what some people are trying to do. There's a lot of digital democracy startups and ideas out there. In general, what they're trying to do with this is to take social media interfaces, vote on, or have debates online in the same, very much the same way that you would within social media, and then vote yes, no, abstain. You can see how many people are in the vote. It's open voting. You can order what you see by relevance, newest first, oldest first. But it's pretty much, it's social media. You can have a crowd of people talking on social media, and then some within some direct democracy systems, they're looking at then voting in politicians who will promise to vote the way that people, that the crowd has determined within the system. So it would pretty much be the equivalent of having Facebook. David's going to be our representative, and we've got a Facebook group, and David's in the House of Commons, and then however we decide within our group that he should vote, he will vote that way. Now, of course, the problems with that is that we're all very busy people. If the London Futurists got infiltrated by some neo-Nazis, there could be the potential that David would have to vote that way, because that's what's happened on this system. It's going to be divisive. What happens when you give everyone a vote and you put people on social media and you amplify the biases with social media interfaces. We kind of tried this experiment. Giving everyone the vote is not the answer. We're not a wise crowd. So, if you've got these two different starting points, either social media or team intelligence for the future of politics, the future of digital democracy, I would say that it's thumbs down for social media. It should be thumbs up for team intelligence. I'm not saying that Enswarm is that platform. We are the Wright brothers version. What I'm hoping to do today is inspire people to potentially use some of these techniques within a political setting, apply some of these principles, and we can get to something that will evolve in a better way. I believe that team intelligence is the better basis for the evolution and the future of political collective intelligence. So, when I talk to people about this, I quite often get, this will never work because of X, Y, and Z. We've got our existing political system. And how is team intelligence going to affect any of that? My answer to that is SpaceX. So as futurists, I'll be surprised if anyone doesn't know Elon Musk's final business plan for SpaceX. It's pretty cool. He wants to put 1 million people on Mars. This is how he's going to do it. They're in phase 2 at the moment. Ongoing space delivery business. Make a lot of money. Bring the ticket to Mars down to a manageable... well, okay, you sell all your assets. That's what he's trying to do. Get it to semi-manageable. And then put 1 million people on Mars. That's what he's trying to do. He's trying to back up humanity. So, whether he manages or not, when he does that, what I like to think about is Mars is a big, red, blank sheet of... it's a blank canvas. It's red. So when you've got no constraints of existing political systems and a knowledge of collective intelligence and up-to-the-minute technology, how could a population organise as a collective? That's sort of thinking point 1 that we can come back to in a minute. Second thing I want to talk about in the last few minutes before we get into discussion is team intelligence and artificial intelligence. So again, from the perspective of neutralising the effects of human cognitive bias and motivating individuals to work towards team success. Let's look at what has happened so far from a bias perspective. So did anyone see this story? It was a couple of years ago now. Microsoft put this Tay AI on Twitter. And it was supposed to be mimicking a teenage girl. And first tweet was, "Hello world," all exciting. 16 hours later, exposed to Twitter, it went from "Hello world" to "Hitler was right, I hate the Jews." That was 16 hours. That was 16 hours exposed to Twitter. That's what a biased human training set can do to artificial intelligence. There are other instances of bias in training sets and then mistakes with AI that are already coming to light. The Americans are doing this disastrous experiment at the moment where they are actually trying to look at the likelihood of reoffending based on a person's background, and it's all coming out of artificial intelligence. And if you are African American, you are far more likely for the AI to say that you are likely to reoffend, and it's causing. And they're using this AI at the point of sentencing based on the future likelihood of reoffending. and in a number of instances it is proving to be fundamentally flawed, and it's from similar biased training sets. So we say that there's this need for bias neutralization, which of course is one of the big things that we're trying to do with team intelligence. So team intelligence could be used to actually train artificial intelligence. And I appreciate we're getting kind of deep into it now. We'll dive into some discussion about this in a minute. And also, we think that humans will be very biased against AI as we start teaming together. So if you put our technology within Enswarm is designed to put a number of different people together and amplify collective intelligence. There is absolutely nothing to stop us attaching in a bot. We haven't done it yet, but the potential is there. Now initially we'll probably all be able to spot which is the artificial intelligence, because it's going to say some stupid things, and we'll rank it down. And it will learn that when it says stupid things, it shouldn't say them again. But there is the potential that humans might be a little bit worried about the fact that artificial intelligence is being put into a team, particularly if you think that, as an actuary, your job might be under threat, and you might start spoofing the AI. So what we're trying to do by neutralizing bias is neutralizing bias not just between people, but between people and AI as well as just each other. So there's all sorts of reasons that and potential applications of team intelligence with artificial intelligence. We should allow artificial intelligence to learn from an unbiased audience. So because our tech, we're already seeing that it reduces bias, we do think that it's a way that you can put artificial intelligence into the team. And what we want to consider is that AI is part of the future of a thinking team. Now this works in nature. Again, with evolution, these are leafcutter ants, all part of the same colony, all totally optimized for different types of jobs. So there would be absolutely nothing to stop us and AI being seen as being part of the same team. AI is going to be much more optimized for crunching numbers and remembering things very specifically in information retrieval, whereas we're a bit more creative. But in the same way as all of these different, very different looking animals are in the same team, we need to try and apply that same thinking between us and AI. Which brings us on to AI motivation. We're almost done. Hollywood always comes up with the Terminator scenario, that AI is going to wake up and just decide that it doesn't like human beings anymore. Whereas actually the people within AI development, of which I'm sure there are some in the room, are far more worried about the motivation of AI. And there's a reason that there are paperclips everywhere. Because while human motivation is for personal and family survival, as we've talked about already, AI doesn't have a set motivation. And the thought experiment used here, I believe it was started by Eliezer Yudkowsky and Nick Bostrom, their collaboration. They talk about what if AI is motivated, the most intelligent AI comes out of a paperclip manufacturing company. That if you tell that AI, if you motivate them with saying, you've just got to produce as many paperclips as you possibly can, and you don't give it any other constraints, what it may choose to do is use all of the world's resources in the manufacture of paperclips, which might mean that we get used up as collateral damage. There's no more food, we get put into furnaces to make more paperclips. And just by it being motivated to make paper clips, it ends up killing us all. That's what they're worried about. And the Future of Life Institute is worried about it. Now, they talk about AI alignment with human values. And this is kind of where we start coming back together, whereas I'm much more about the final motivation. What's the big strategic end state? We should talk more about that quickly. The human values side of it. This is, within the Future of Life Institute, the hardest question that they're working on now from their perspective. What are human values? How do you code them? And how do you do it in a one-off? How do you not end up in a paperclip scenario? And this is back where we think that we can actually come in a little bit. So, if you've taken our potentially paperclip motivated AI and put it into a human team, if it starts coming up with ideas like, hey, maybe we could kill all humans, then you've got the human in the loop safeties to say, whoa, whoa, that's not what we meant. Bring it back a little bit, just make some better paper clips. We think that team intelligence can be this safety valve. Now, this is early days. I mean, this is kind of cutting edge stuff. You're the first people I've talked to about this. But it's a possibility. And overall, I think that AI and humans we need to consider ourselves as if not part of the same team, maybe part of the same species going forward. And we need to share this same overall motivation. Unfortunately, this is where we get into our discussion with both politics and artificial intelligence. If team intelligence technology can do two things, it removes the bias and helps individuals work towards team success. What does team success mean to humanity? And for me, that's the most important question to answer with team intelligence technology. That's the bit where I need help. And so, kind of
Great.
On three,
open
up for questions and discussion.
Very thanks, Joe. That was great. Just a couple of questions about anonymity.
Yes.
Okay. Sounds very. You sparked a lot of thoughts in my mind about some of the good and bad decision processes I've been through in my career in the smartphone industry. And I should say for the camera that most of the people I worked with were very smart and very open and collaborative. But occasionally, there was sometimes it was clear that people were advocating points of views in meetings because they knew that's what their boss would like. There were two different departments, and departments maybe had different goals, and people weren't, in some cases, they weren't following the objective lines of discussion. They were saying, well, I'm going to champion this point of view because it would make life easier for their boss in some sense. Mm-hmm. So I can see that if people didn't know whose opinions were being discussed, then that would get rid of that problem. But is this really going to be credible in a real case? Because one would still be quite clear sometimes. Even in the little trial that I've done with Enswarm, sometimes I could guess, this person is probably making this proposal because I can see from the way he's writing that this is probably this person.
Yeah.
So is anonymity really, can you achieve that? And can people avoid signalling?
What we start seeing over a few different uses of our tech at the moment is that initially people will be able to guess it, particularly if you've got sort of 4 or 5 people in there and you work with them all the time, you can tell writing styles. We start seeing behaviour change where people write in slightly more generic styles. They're aware of their own behaviour and they're aware of their own writing style so that they stop doing it to start being more anonymous, particularly as they start getting into more controversial topics that they can tell the truth in a way that they couldn't normally. Anonymity. There's a spectrum of anonymity. We're only anonymous on the interface at the beginning. Behind the scenes, everything's recorded against you. Fully anonymous platforms and fully anonymous technologies can be quite dangerous. There was a fully anonymous social media experiment a couple of years ago, and what you end up with is a lot of trolling type behaviour where it's resulting in fair few teen suicides. It's really dangerous. We're not that far on the anonymous scale. We tell everyone, listen, behind the scenes, you're accountable for what you say. If you say anything abusive, we will know exactly who you are, and it keeps people accountable. But you know, when I had the scores, we can tell people how engaged a person was, and we can tell how much value they added. So what we see over a couple of Enswarms is people actively trying to get to the point where they are delivering higher value. We think that long term we can use that as a measure for whether they should be bonused, whether they should be promoted. How much value they add in a particular field is a true measure of their general expertise within that. So we call it go-kart gamification. If anyone's ever been go-karting, it's kind of fun driving around, but afterwards, at the end, it's also fun to see if you've beaten everyone else. And my wife actually always beats me. It's really annoying. She's faster on go-kart track. But that bit's fun too. And so what we start seeing is this behaviour change where the first few times on Enswarm, and particularly if they are traditionally aggressive extroverts who tend to try and drive meetings, when they're on Enswarm, they will typically have quite high engagement values because they will be putting lots of content in, but everyone else, without realising that it's them, will be marking their value down because saying "I agree!" ! Does not really add lots of value to a meeting. So over a couple of Enswarms, we see people putting in more thoughtful comments, using the anonymity to get into real debates, and then everyone in general being more respectful.
Would this meeting work better if the questions were anonymous? In a minute, a bunch of people are going to put up their hands.
They are.
And following my biases and say, "Oh, you look like you've got an interesting question. And I know you've asked good questions in the past, and you haven't asked good questions for a while. I'm not going to bother." Should that really be better?
I tell you, now we're going to get no questions, David.
Just hypothetically, would it be better if these meetings took place anonymously?
I would say in this situation, because we don't all sort of know each other very well, it doesn't matter so much. There's no overt hierarchy in the room. When I was in the military, you wear your hierarchy on your chest. You would make an immediate, people would make an immediate assumption about how clever you were, the value that you were going to add as soon as you walked in the room, which is going back to the Special Forces examples. That was one of my first really interesting examples of or lessons that I learned from them, because none of them would wear rank. They would turn up and say, right, we're going to run a mission. You had no idea if you were speaking to a private soldier or a general. They all called each other by their first names, and you just didn't know. And when that happens, you're immediately more respectful to them because you don't know. They might be some form of boss. We're on our system where you don't know whether you're speaking to a CEO or an intern. You just have to rate contributions for the value that they add. Here, I sense that we don't really. We've got the culture within the Futurists. I would say that we don't really have a rank in the room. David, you might have one in the back of your mind, David, but I certainly I'm not aware of it. So in this scenario, and look, I'm not advocating that we should remove the need, that we should remove all speech and actually talking to each other in real life, particularly extroverts, where we get a lot of energy from it. We are a bit of a tribe within the Futurists. It feels good to be in this kind of situation, I think we can have a free and open debate without the need for our tech today. So.
Just one question about the Microsoft AI.
Yeah.
Wasn't it the case that they released one in China as well, that they actually was treated much better, and there's still such a thing in existing, whereas in the Western world she had to be switched off pretty quickly?
I'm actually not aware about that one. However, I would.
It was in Japan.
It was Japan.
It was in Japan, was it? And so the Japanese teenagers did not mislead Tay in the same way that Western teenagers.
Very polite.
See, you're sort of biased there against teenagers, David. I think it's not necessarily.
Teenagers.
Yeah, teenagers. Again, that's going to be cultural, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's the thing, if you're in a more respectful place, but what we should be doing, we should all be respectful.
Okay. Questions?
Oh,
look. Thanks for the familiarity bias.
Yeah.
Familiarity bias, yes.
In which case would you say that hierarchy is superior in the chain of decision making? Because you could say somebody as eloquent and expert as David know a broad, diverse set of subjects that maybe individuals don't. So maybe his decision making, he will know some things that individuals will not be able to know to make an educated decision.
So sometimes hierarchy has value. Sometimes people's authority makes sense. Somebody who is a professor on the subject, you want to listen a little bit more to him.
Totally agree.
Than to the teenager.
Yes. Okay. So.
But is there other areas where you will say a certain kind of hierarchy, and it could be of anything, of maybe competencies, but also I don't know, anything, is superior in any part of this?
Yes.
Sorry, David, can't hear at the back.
I'll reiterate the question. If I understand you correctly, the question is hierarchy useful at any phase within what we're doing? Yes, is the short answer. I'll expand, don't worry. We look here, when I said that the human team thinking process, what we do together is to, if you've got some sort of, in fact, let's look at the full loop. This is the you can sort of see some of is the replacement for the military operational cycle. In fact, let's see what my laser work here. Yes, it will. That's good. If you've got some sort of overall objective up here, some big vision, the way that we will try and get to it, we'll first off ask ourselves some questions. How are we going to achieve this vision? We'll discuss our ideas, decide on actions, break them into activities, complete them. And this is where the military thinking comes in a little bit, is that when you do something to work towards a vision or a goal, doing those activities or not doing them affects the overall situation, which changes the situation, which leads to more questions. So on a day-to-day basis, in the same way that we would go through this operational strike cycle within the military, in work I now go through this this cycle on a daily basis to try and get to some form of, to our big vision of transforming the way that teams think together. Now, Enswarm covers the part where we can ask questions, discuss ideas, and then decide on actions. We do this in two phases, and it kind of breaks there. We've got this swarming phase, where it's anonymous, but then we've got the reporting phase, and I kind of went quickly through that bit because I didn't want to turn it into a whole commercial. But what we do is we take the aggregated opinions of the individuals and then display them back to the team. And we say, this is what the team thought. In fact, maybe I'll just show you on here. A lot of slides, haven't I? Here we go. And so we now use these three bits of information within a team meeting. So we're not saying don't have the meeting. What we're saying is we can make that use the analysis from the swarming phase to make the meeting much more focused, much more objective, and we can say the team thought that these were the top actions. At that stage, people higher in the hierarchy can say, actually, guys, we can't do it like that because of X, Y, and Z. Now, all the research goes to show that if people have been involved in coming up with ideas and they felt like they've had their voices heard, even if then it doesn't go their way, if they understand why it doesn't go their way, and there is genuinely a good reason for it, they'll still be more engaged anyway. So you might end up doing the fifth action because the boss said so, but if the boss gives you a reason, you'll still feel more engaged. So what we're trying to get is that team cohesion.
But how can they rate something that they might not
hear?
How can they rate something accurately if they don't have all the information to be able to make that judgment?
That's an interesting point. In fact, actually, if I'd recommend you have a look at what they're doing. Have you heard of Bridgewater and Ray Dalio? Ray Dalio's done a great TED talk. So he's the founder of the largest hedge fund in America. They use technology to make decisions. They are doing what he would say here. They have this. They do this at the moment at the decision-making phase. They actually weight the expertise of certain individuals to help them make a better decision. That's kind of not where we're at. There is another piece of, and they take expertise into account at that phase. But that hierarchy and expertise matters here. We're kind of doing more stuff here. Phil, I would sort of put thought space here as situational awareness. We can talk. Well, Phil's got a great tool.
Question? Jim?
I'm just curious. You said motivations for most people are individuals.
A bit louder.
Individuals or family.
Motivations for you. Joe says is for people is to help them as individuals or to help their families.
And so, how do you get them to align in teams if fundamentally they're not? I mean, they may overlap, but sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
In many cases, they don't.
Other motivational methods, so this bit can get a bit dark. Religion, tribes. There are so many other ways that you can control groups of people. But fundamentally, if you break it down into our evolution, if you strip away all of that part of it, the research does go to show that it's you'll be motivated first by shelter for yourself and your family, and I'm not sure how else I can.
Yeah. So, but like maybe okay, I want a big house.
Yeah.
And my boss wants a big house.
Yeah.
But the decision we make may not be giving us both big houses.
Yeah. That's the fundamental problem with business, isn't it? That's the, and that's where this does, to a certain extent, why we're saying, as well as team intelligence technology, we do need to look at how we incentivize individuals within businesses. So if you incentivize them to take risks in the short term, then we need to stop doing that. You can use it. That's why I say you can use our tech to be able to tie it to. Well, let's see. Within the collective, if there are 10 of you on Enswarm, and it's quite clearly that someone is trying to drive Enswarm in a particular way, it does highlight it. If no one else agrees, it tends to filter out those ideas. If that person can still drive through something that will benefit them afterwards, on Enswarm, it will show that they did that.
There is a change question also about, can there be a motivational structure from which they will both benefit? So currently I might like the big house and my colleague might want the big house as well. Does it have to be an either or? Can the structure be set up so that we all collectively gain? I think this comes back to your final slide and saying what should be the goal for humanity, and the goal for humanity should be there's enough abundance so that we can all flourish. And getting there, of course, in the short term there are win-lose situations. Evan.
Well, I've got a whole stack of questions. So
So we're gonna have to, there's a whole stack of hands as well. So we'll maybe take. I'll try and get around everybody.
Don't you just need a good chairperson?
Yeah, that works.
I mean,
That's the existing
a
answer.
good chairperson would do all of that big time.
Yeah. How many good chair people do you know?
Evan does a great job, by the way, chairing meetings at Conway Hall on Sunday. So.
Evan, I totally agree with you. Some of my commanding officers, my first ones, I was just mesmerised by how well they could control the room. I'm not there yet. You know, I'm coming up 40. I'm still not good at it. It's such a specific skill set to be able to facilitate or chair a meeting and
pull everyone in.
Do
that as well.
Keep the extroverts down a little bit.
Absolutely.
Get the introverts up. Quieten everyone down.
Absolutely.
So if everyone should teach more, or we should practice more.
This is to be honest. This is the we're not disrupting this industry, but it's the existing answer. It's how do we, if we're not very good at meetings at the moment, going through this questions to ideas to actions, you can train people up in leadership and teamwork. But how many people have got degrees here?
All of us.
Most. Exactly. How many people have done extensive, several years worth of teamwork training? And a couple. Our education system is all to do with expertise, not leading and managing people.
So if we want collaborative intelligence, collective intelligence, it's technology, but it's also changing our education system. Tony?
Yes, I think Joe, you said a great deal this afternoon, and covered it in ways you think.
Yeah,
sorry,
sorry,
you got
point
before you've hardly taken in the first
yeah,
one. So
absolutely.
I don't want to. I mean, I think I could over time take issue with quite a bit of what you said. But what I wanted to say is thank you for the talk. And I think the most important thing, perhaps above all, is to push forward the idea of collective intelligence.
Yes.
Because I think outside, people who in this room, people who've got some involvement with it, we don't hear nearly enough about it. So my comment really is to say that there are, apart from you, many other parallel collective intelligence initiatives going on. I want to mention one. I don't want to sell it to anybody, but just to mention it as an example of something else, which is the Millennium Project, which David is aware of, and which some other people may know of, which is a voluntary global think tank with people from many countries. We've got actually 63 nodes all over the world. In the UK, we're fairly inactive, I have to say. But that is set up to bring some thousands of people together in a way that enables the big international issues that we face to be discussed. And I'll just read out the definition of collective intelligence that they came up with last some time ago. As an example, an emergent property from synergies among data, information, knowledge, software, hardware, and experts, those with new insight as well as recognized authorities, that continually learns from feedback to produce nearly just-in-time knowledge for better decisions than any one of these elements acting alone could produce. And it's similar in so it's not exactly what you said. It's a little bit more neutral, I think, than what you said. But I just want to make the point that there are all these other initiatives going on for people who don't know them. If anybody's interested in the Millennium Project, all you need to do is Google Millennium Project. And of course, going beyond that, there are global brain initiatives going on in the EEC and in North America.
I want to know which one of these are actually working. When I finished my own book on transcending politics, I wanted to have an appendix which said, by the way, here are the tools which I think actually are producing collective intelligence. And there were lots of people said, well, that tool over there might work, and that tool over there might work, but I never got enough substance and I ran out of time, so I shelved that appendix. So there's nothing in my book about here are the actual tools that work. So I would like to hear more.
Well, I think it's as Joe said, it's something that is evolving, and certainly the Millennium Project has done a number.
So they've done Delphi process, don't they? The Delphi process is a little bit like this.
The Delphi system is a technique that's been going for a long, long time, but is basically allows experts to interact with each other and get feedback from each other, and is largely anonymous in the process.
Yeah.
And I think one other point quickly, and then I'll shut up for the rest of the afternoon. Swarms. The idea of swarms is something that is increasingly coming into the public domain as well. Anybody who saw Sir David Attenborough's programme repeated on Wednesday night, the Empire Dance. Yeah. You didn't mention the dance do fight each other as well. Like sometimes they're not all. They haven't all, as we should, as human beings, become a supergod.
Oh yeah, definitely. So you respond to some of those. I've put up similar businesses, and sorry, I should have you in here as well. We always get compared to unanimous AI, and again, I don't consider unanimous AI competition to us. They've got another amazing new type of interface where they're on an anonymous basis. They are making choice-based decisions in real time through this swarming interface. I bring this up for crowdsourcing. We're not crowdsourcing. We're team intelligence. We're trying to amplify and transform the way that meetings are done. So as soon as you get much beyond sort of 15 to 20 people with our tech, it doesn't work. I'm a huge advocate of broader scale collective intelligence and crowdsourcing. I think it's really important, but we're just we're trying to put in bits of collective intelligence into human meetings, so we call ourselves team intelligence.
Looking for female. Yes.
I didn't notice whether you're doing anything like this, but I wonder if you can give people a rating based on the level of bias that they show, so especially in a political context. I think if you could rate people on how closely they approach John Orwell's original position, it would help people make independent.
Yeah, I mean, it's early days for us. I'd say that when people, what we're finding so far, when they are putting things in that are low value and people rate them as low value, it's enough for them to see, oh, hang on, my engagement's up here, but my value's down here. Why? And then them start to look a little bit inward, and quite often it's the first time that they've done that. We're too young as a startup to be sort of saying, yes, you're the person who is potentially going to buy our tech, you're significant, you're really bad, but we will get there. Overall, we see that there are three broad phases with Enswarm. We're trying to focus on organisations first, so that people can use us within business. Secondly, we think that there's a way of stepping outside the organisation to bring people in, and we can start to add diversity to discussions and bring in other experts. And because, of course, when you're on Enswarm, and if you're in successive Enswarms and all around a particular topic, we can start saying, David, you are an expert in futurism. And then we could potentially connect David up with worldwide futurists to be able to have a discussion about that. So you would end up with an overall expertise rating. So that's kind of where we're thinking. And then within the politics side, we think that if people are using Enswarm or digital team intelligence in business and in their life to have these discussions and share expertise, that there will be a pull from politics. Now, weirdly, we're already seeing that pull. We're doing some work with two councils, so Reading Council are leading it. They are trying to, between the council, the police force, and their local safer neighbourhood forums, they're trying to get these swarms going to discuss what should be done about various different topics. So we're seeing that pull, but it's early days for us there.
I've been abroad for a good 9 years in Pakistan for personal reasons, for lands and properties, so I can safeguard my family. I guess that was a motivation. Yeah, I landed with the army there, and I became a professor. Well, that was the opportunity to go there, become a professor of strategic studies, which is what I am. How do you negate social conditioning of particular different environments? And there's very different environments, even within one community. because I find that hierarchy is instinct within human nature, primarily because as a child, the first thing we see is an authority figure, and we grow up in that guise. That's the social condition that we have. How can you take that out of a human being? And when you're talking about AI, for example, 1,000,000 times more IQ, looking at us as if we're bacteria, for example, why would it have regard? I mean, there's not like we see cancer; it would just wipe us out. I find that the only way, maybe, that we might be able to overcome this is to join it. Really.
So,
isn't that the way that you're looking at in the future?
yeah.
So when you have Enswarm, you're talking about individuals
Yep.
that are actually partly machine.
So, what I'm kind of advocating at the moment is that while computers are not, and AI is not as intelligent as us, we should still try and view them that, from my perspective, in the end, they will be way more intelligent than us. But if we're going to get to the point where we can develop general AI or artificial general intelligence safely, we need to almost consider ourselves as at least part of the same team, if not part of the same species, but different types. Overall, do I think that the AI is suddenly going to wake up and just decide that there's total disregard? Not if it sees us as part of the same species.
But that's the thing, you see. Even humans see us as less than other humans. The fact of the matter is, it's very easy to wipe out humans.
Yeah.
And we've shown it ourselves.
Yeah.
And if we're looking at, I was talking to Francis Fukuyama a couple of years ago when I was in the States, and we were talking about the end of history. But this was also talking about the idea of evolving understanding from other entities that are not human, for example, extraterrestrials, aliens, you can call them. And they were trying to understand an alien based on our perceptions as human beings of how we've evolved. And I asked, well, why would they think like us?
Yeah.
They would not.
No, they won't.
And the machines are not human.
No,
the
they
end.
won't.
So we can't view them as the same species. And in fact, I find that we're going to have to evolve beyond humanity. And that's where transhumanism comes in.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
really
this
at the
is
end of
where
the
it
day.
gets, obviously I don't have all the answers for this.
So we adopt
Yeah. But I suppose
technology for ourselves to be able to compete with them.
Yeah.
Which may even be difficult.
But see, even in framing this question, we're anthropomorphizing AI by thinking that it will be bothered about killing us at all.
I mean, I don't think it would care.
No, it might not care. Yeah, which is the paperclip example, isn't it? All it cares about is making paperclips, and we're just collateral damage in
Some people
in
say
the
that's
sideline.
absurd, but after all, we have corporations
Yeah.
that are sort of like AIs. Corporations are given a goal,
Yeah.
make profits.
Yeah.
And if there's some rainforest that gets cut down in order to make profits, the shareholders, when they're thinking in terms of narrow financial benefits, just shrug their shoulders and say, well, of course we've got to do this.
Yeah.
If we don't do it, our competitors will do
Yeah.
it. So an AI that's empowered by a corporation to try and boost its profits, the same dynamics might come along. In fact, you might have the humans
Yeah.
in there saying, we've two choices. We can put the AIs and the humans on the same team and get them debating,
Yeah.
or we can just have the AIs deciding by themselves and coming up with conclusions. And frankly, the AIs are going to come up with the conclusions faster. Why am I going to slow them down by having these humans in the loop? And then for the next 9 decisions, the AI is going to make a tremendously smart and good decision.
Absolutely.
And then the 10th time, it
As I forget the
blows,
humans altogether.
it tops its stack or some other kind of software bug, and it thinks
Yeah.
it's generating more profits, and it cuts down all the Amazon
Oh yeah, there are so many different potential
Yeah.
ways that we could end up dead in this scenario, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, sorry, if this is a discussion, I hope.
Yeah, go.
Then look at it this way. Just imagine AI as an alien.
Yeah.
So it's not the same species. It's gone beyond that, and it's just come from. It's been away from us for a while, and it's just come back to this Earth, in which we've screwed up completely. How would it view us?
Pretty poorly, I think.
And what do you do to cancer?
pretty.
You
pretty
cut it
poorly.
out.
Oh, this is.
So then, what choice
So
have
we might have to leave this to the part.
Yeah,
I think what many
I
people
just
say,
had a beer before I came, so.
what many people say,
Sorry.
and this is what you mentioned from the Future of Life Institute, the goal is to ensure that the AI does have some sympathy with human values. That
Why would it have sympathy?
Because we bake them in deeply enough.
So,
Somehow.
We have to.
exactly.
That's a software that we have to control. Then.
It's and that's why I suggest that we want to be bringing AI into human teams and develop it before it gets to the point where it's infinitely more intelligent than us, and it does see us as part. If we can get it to think of at least that we're part of the same team.
Now, this is a good discussion.
It is a good
because
discussion.
it's not just what values do we bake into the AI to start off with. It's the AI learns by observations.
Yeah.
And that's how computer vision comes along, because it has a whole training set, and as a result of the training set, it's able to spot things. So there is this other approach to value-aligned AI, which says if it's surrounded by people who are manifesting good ethics, then that's more likely for the AI to say, well, this is how I need to behave. If you're surrounded by self-seeking, selfish, tribalistic people, then this might influence the AI to adopt that as well.
Social
We
conditioning.
should take some questions.
That's right.
Over here, yeah?
Yeah, so
You're coming back.
No, I'm not leaving. I'm just going to go to the washroom.
That was a real...
we all need to know that. So you touched upon how teams can create better decisions through this, but my question is, if the team is inherently biased in its construction, say it's a bunch of white dudes, privileged, living in California that are trying to come up with the best idea of the 15 individuals in the room to make, say, I don't know if you're familiar with the trolley conundrum, where you're setting a trolley down a set of rails, and it's going to either hit a family crossing that, or you can hit the switch and it's going to just hit a fat guy. And you have to make you have to train the AI to make the decision which one is the more ethical one to kill in this scenario. There's a lot of bias that is pre-baked into that.
Yeah.
So without changing the constitution of the team, how's your tool making that team make more effective decisions?
If the team is inherently biased from the start, we're going to struggle. I mean, we're not a magic potion. There's no panacea. However, what I would say there is there needs to be the realization that the team, if it's all from one ethnic background, all very similar backgrounds, it's very likely to be biased, suffering from groupthink. Therefore, what you need to do is bring a more diverse skill set and true thought diversity into that team. But when you do that, if you bring people from different backgrounds, different cultures, it's very difficult for those people to start working together efficiently straight away because they don't understand each other. That's why I was saying it's a real benefit within the military, where you're not expected to perform for a year. We came back from Iraq, our unit was sort of pulled apart, put back together with a whole lot of new people that you don't trust, and we were given a year to build up and train before we were then back to Afghanistan and expected to perform again. In business, we just expect people to turn up and perform straight away. So what our tech would do, if you did have the diversity there, it would allow those diverse people to very quickly work together without the need to train for 6 months and get to know each other and get over the biases that they would have. And that's really where we're trying to help.
Good.
Question here in the beard?
You keep mentioning examples from the military, which I think is interesting for another reason, which is the associated risk with decision making in the military is to the individual members of a team making a decision.
Yeah.
It's far more
It's a good motivator, isn't it? Not dying.
It's helpful to not die, yeah.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, in that context, given that many businesses disassociate risk of individual team members' decision making to the overall outcome, is it something that you're taking into account? Do you think that it matters? And if so, how?
Yeah. Accountability, which is why we're not fully anonymous. Part of the benefit that some organisations see is that because essentially if you've done work within an Enswarm, within a swarm, all of that is recorded, and so we haven't got to this point yet, but down the line you'll be able to say, right, was this decision that the team made either good or bad? And how do we do that at the moment? And you'd have to go back and look at meeting notes. How often can you tell from meeting notes exactly who said what and what the thought processes were and who voted on what and who rated what? You can go back into an Enswarm 3, 4, 10 years down the line, and there's no, you're accountable for it.
Question here?
I think you mentioned a key word before, which was trust.
Yeah.
So if everything is anonymous, I'm very suspicious when people say something's anonymous. I've seen in my former corporations people thinking, I'm not going to truly say what I think because I don't trust that this is truly anonymous, even if it's done by a third party. Yeah. So my first question is, are you a for-profit organisation and so on?
Yes.
Therefore, you have a conflict of interest, say, if the CEO of Goldman Sachs says we want to use this, and suddenly there's someone giving what seems like a good idea, but it's not what he wants to hear, and he says, I want to know who it is, I know you know, and if you want to keep this contract going, I want to know who it is. So I, as that employee, will always be suspicious of that relationship. So how do you overcome that?
We don't know yet. We're a startup. What we think is that that the data of exactly who said what, which isn't readily available after the fact, the stats that we showed you is available to the chairperson or facilitator. Exactly who said what is only available in the Excel. We think a couple of large organisations are telling us that it will probably be the people department, HR department, that would be the only ones with access to that. So, Enswarm, we don't want to know. There's still got to be a measure within all of this as an acceptance that the culture needs to change, but that's how we're getting around it. We're giving it to the people department.
So my question back to you is, would you be more comfortable if this tool was created and distributed by a non-profit corporation?
I think I would, yes.
Cool. I mean,
if the guys who did Linux, for example, if the community who made Linux did it, I would probably feel more comfortable with it. There's no reflection on you.
No. Well, I can tell you why we decided to do it as a for-profit, because ultimately my motivations are to try and transform politics. I got pretty philosophical sitting in Afghanistan for a couple of years, wondering why I was fighting people I had nothing, no problem with at all. And the irony when I was with the US forces was that if you look at the average US soldier and the average Taliban, they're both very religious, like their guns, just want to be left alone. They're pretty much the same. They actually probably get on quite well, but they're just, they're fighting each other. So very philosophical. My politics is what I really want to do. There are political initiatives and not-for-profit digital democracy type startups and charities. Back to your point on trust, I think it's fringe. It could have this tech could have the potential to change the world, but if we go straight in saying to people, we want to use this technology to affect the biggest decisions on that are going to affect you, we're going to see huge pushback. By what we're doing at the moment and going into teams just in businesses, and we're not huge amounts of money, we're sort of per user per month. We charge people sort of 12 quid. They can use it within their teams. If it helps them make better decisions, that will naturally grow. We will then see if people are using that in their business life. We'll see them just ultimately questioning, well, why are we using these other techniques in politics? So we think that actually, in order to transform politics, we need to transform business at an increasing level first to be more successful.
Phil? I have a question about politics.
Yeah.
So,
you showed a slide of the House of Commons and the antiquated way in which the politicians run things and make decisions. How do you see them changing? How do you see new technology, and particularly in combination with AI? How do you see this shift? Because it seems to me that we're run by a bunch of, or by a system. We say a bunch of whatever, but by a system that doesn't fit at all with what's actually happening, particularly in technology, particularly with systems like the ones you've described. And I have to admit to having a personal interest in politics as well, and indeed with this kind of software.
So you're going to build up stage by stage. You're not going to go straight in and change the House of Commons in your next business cycle. You're aiming to.
That's why we need this groundswell of opinion with people. Yeah,
Work
yeah,
on this together.
yeah. But ultimately, I want to share these ideas for other. There are so many different political startups that and I was looking at a lot of them again, and sort of direct democracy and tech initiatives. They were very popular a couple of years ago, and some of them seem to have sort of tailed off a little bit because they're all trying to use familiar technology and social media interfaces. But I think they're finding it's ineffective. We need which is why I propose as team intelligence technology as a seed, a different evolutionary path for technology that can actually transform politics. As well, I would say crowdsourcing can, and that's why I'm very open about the secret sauce of Enswarm, neutralising bias and motivating individuals towards team success. It is what we're doing is not rocket science. It's just a lot of, from a sort of design perspective, I appreciate I have sort of just dumped Joe Kay's brain on all of you, 8 years worth of thinking within a couple of hours. But so there's lots of different aspects within it, but none of it's sort of proprietary. Take it and try and actually do something within politics. I would be more than
Step by
happy with
step.
that. Yeah,
Tony.
Yes, what a great presentation. It's inspired me a lot.
Oh, thank you.
And you have stirred up my mind so much that I will write separately on our website, because there are many comments that I will have. It's a pity that we had your presentation a year ago, because for the last year I've been thinking how to save humanity from superintelligence and provided some answers. Yes, straight into the politics, but before we go there, this meetup site, for instance, is an example of teamwork, or could be an example of teamwork, if people had been anonymous. There are some great inspirational comments, and I'm not sure they will have to take it up, but one way could be, for instance, to depersonalize the people that make comments in some way, if it is possible. I don't know. Coming back to your suggestion about the human beings being who they are, not the swarm mentality, but the sheep mentality, which you can't change overnight, is there a way to make the change? And I agree entirely with you that the change is to through add-ons, like technology. I have some other ideas, but I didn't think about what you just said. Now, the problem is, how do you inspire the politicians that they leave the crowd, the sheep mentality, which means that their swarm mentality is how the party can win the next election, not just individuals. So in some way they behave like a swarm, but not from the point of view that is beneficial to us. Now, the question is how you do it together. And the final point is about what you suggested, that make superintelligence a member of the team. I think in the period leading to technological singularity, that's probably a good option. But at some stage, it will be no option, because that team member will be billions of times more intelligent than anybody else, and it will just go away. But anyway, great presentation.
Thank you. Firstly, inspiring the politicians to change now, that is impossible. So this is why I suppose what I would really like to do, and it is have this thought experiment of the govern Mars, the Mars government, because and use that as a method to say, if we have a blank sheet of paper with no existing political parties, what would we do? And try and galvanise the world around researching that. So working more from sort of the ideal backwards rather than broken system edging forwards. Every time I try and say, team intelligence, they'll say, well, what about the parties? Parties and tribes, it's broken system. It just doesn't work. I think political parties should be banned. I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that the current system does not work. And then to your point about superintelligence, I totally agree. At the point where we've gone post-singularity, and if we've got a good, if we've come with a positive outcome, and we haven't managed to kill ourselves along the way, you're right. At that stage, there's not going to be too much that we as humans can add to the superintelligence. What I'm really talking about is in the lead up to a singularity event, you could use team intelligence to try and ensure that we hit a positive outcome post singularity where we don't all die. If we do, then we're into the good position of abundance and being looked after.
Just like at one point, which I agree entirely with what you just said about the importance of uploading our values into the superintelligence or whatever. The problem is that we can't ourselves agree what those values should be, because think about the Saudi Arabia or China or Russia, they come together with the States and us and say, okay, this is our 10 commandments.
That's your final slide, wasn't it?
Yeah. That's the question.
That's
so many hands, so many hands. So you have to move quickly. At the back, yes?
Yeah, hi. I think one of the biggest challenges I find in globalization is siloing that already happens within teams. So is there any thought to allow people who may be in the business to guest in a team, to open up the thinking, refresh the thinking, challenge the thinking, which would allow the organisation to start to see where the best position thinking is in the business, rather than just following the thinking inside the...
Yeah, definitely. That's exactly. So what we want to do with our tech, so traditionally that's achieved through secondments, and then it sort of takes, when someone turns up and they're an outsider and it doesn't really work. So
and they're pre-selected in any event to
be
the team.
So we can do secondments digitally. Our tech's just a facilitator. But this is we're more and more starting to work with digital transformation and change consultants and these sorts of ideas where you could say, right, well let's try and get some true thought diversity into the team. That's exactly what we're trying to do, because when people come from the outside, they ask the questions that don't normally get asked, and that's where we can break the cycle of groupthink. But within a team, when an outsider turns up, we've got this inherent resistance to, well, what do you know? You're an outsider. That's where.
That's why there's real skills in being that outsider in a way that doesn't generate antagonism. So my business
we're trying to make it
easier. Say futurist and catalyst. I think the catalyst role is very important, to come in and stimulate energies which were there but which weren't recognised before. If we move along in the middle there, in the back.
Yes. So I have this thinking. So what the AI does basically gathers all the information from the team. And says what the best option would be. But sometimes the overall opinion is not necessarily the best opinion. So my point is, does this makes us a bit too comfortable in taking a risk, a high risk decision? So, for example, if the two brothers that wanted to fly would make that assumption in a meeting, in a team, everyone would probably just say that that's rubbish, but they made it happen.
Yeah.
So, do we have a risk on going for the safety, even that that's in our nature, as you said, and not opt for something that would revolutionize?
So it's in our nature. So we assume that we know what other people are thinking, and then we, in an open meeting, we don't put our heads above the parapet for potentially looking stupid. You know, in China, I think they call it tall poppy syndrome, and you know, there's social pressure. So you have to, before you come up with what you think might be a controversial or stupid question, in your mind, you think about the social implications of it, so you don't say it. Maybe on Enswarm, the behaviour that we're trying to promote is just throw it out there, no one can see, and then if no one really rates it up, it just sort of falls by the wayside. But actually what we typically will find is that if someone will put something in that you might thought was a bit of a crazy idea, it actually galvanizes a whole load of thought, and we rate not for agreement but for the value it adds to the conversation. So if people are coming with outside perspectives, they will typically get a higher rating anyway, even if people don't necessarily agree with them. So you're sort of almost motivated to come up with more creative ideas. I mean, we're not there yet on the interface. It's early days for us.
So many interesting questions.
Yeah,
we could go into each of them in many more details. Peter?
Yeah, so could it help to fix Facebook, because Facebook's clearly broken?
Yes.
Now.
Yeah. Yes.
It's going on to 2 billion people.
You're trying to create a network that will have 2 billion people in the same discussion?
So, look, social media is, we're not necessarily trying to do that. I think that might be some other form of team intelligence. Where social media interfaces are dangerous is when you try and use them to discuss ideas. And there are plenty of businesses out there, ideation platforms, where I, as Joe Kay, can put forward an idea, and depending upon my status in the company, other people it becomes then a personality or popularity contest to see how much of an influencer I am and how many likes I can get and what the overall rating is. And we get this sheep-like driving towards one idea and not a different idea. Social media is great, like tequila is great. You know, it's good fun, and you can have a couple of drinks in the evening, but it should be monitored, and we should treat it, social media, like as a fun but dangerous tool, and only use it in certain circumstances.
So I don't think we should be in the business of coming up with better Facebook. We should be in the business of coming up with tools that will do some of the things that Facebook currently doesn't do very well, and we can do them better.
Yeah, I mean, another difficult thing, we talk about values, it's difficult, but there are situations that are uncertain, but there's another situations that I'm quite close with, is about aesthetic. So it's about, say, for example, there are lots and lots of art around, and at the moment we're relying on also museum curators, also art experts, critics and all. Do you see maybe, I mean, in a sense, I'm just wondering whether, well, what your immediate reaction about whether any kind of tools can help with kind of coming to
a more objective assessment of art.
Something like that, I guess. But
it's trusting the highest paid art curator,
or perhaps having them discuss using, say, Enswarm in an open kind of way, but everybody can see.
Yeah.
Do you think that might be an interesting?
Oh, it would be an interesting experiment.
I think there actually is. I need to look it up, the name of it, but there is a project under like people are specifically trying to independently curate art.
Yeah, I'd love to. No, I mean, I suppose what we're doing is throwing this out to the broader population and letting people come up with ways of using our technology. You can start using it for free. Go on to enswarm.com, put your names in, and just play with it.
We'll do a trial. We'll do a trial question. We'll have to figure out what the question is we want to come up with.
And it needs, at this point, it needs to be facilitated. It needs to be chaired still. You know, it's still a meeting at the moment. You know, we're trying to build more and more of that into.
I'm going to take your final slide and use that as the seed question.
Go. Yeah, that's a big one.
Actually, there's two next to each other.
On that topic, so your tool obviously automates the facilitation of team decision making, and you talked about having AIs in that team. I just wondered, is it in your kind of development plan to use machine learning and AI to improve that facilitation, or are you kind of fixed with that stuff?
No, So firstly, we don't automate the decision making. All we do is, you know, if there are 10 people in a meeting, and let's say you're 100 people, everyone's got 100 on the IQ. You've got potentially 1,000 IQ points there. In general, the actual thinking and who decides the action is probably done with like 1 or 2 or 3 different people. So you've maybe got 300, the IQ is only sort of 300 within the group. That's sort of the diminishing effects of groupthink. What we're trying to do is using the crowd, the wisdom of the crowd principles and some of the other techniques and removing of the bias and motivating people, we're trying to take that up to closer to 1,000 and maybe even beyond. But all we're really doing is getting you to think about a question, the answer to a question on your own, getting everyone else to do that simultaneously, putting it all together and displaying it back to you to say, hey, did you think that this is what you have all thought, rather than needing to get in a meeting room and going around the table saying, what did you think, what did you think, what did you think? By the time you've got to the 5th person, you've changed your mind based on the fact that your boss has said something different. It's your annual appraisal tomorrow, and you don't want your you don't want to be saying something against her when the next day she's going to be responsible for how much you're going to get paid this year.
But they're both algorithms that are basically taking those inputs into analysis and output, and basically yours is a different approach. So I guess it comes back to some of the questions we were asking earlier around how do you know if one input's coming from an expert or from a boss?
Yeah.
Are you planning to improve that?
Part of that, as you start getting, and this is where I would encourage you to look at what Ray Dalio is doing at Bridgewater. They will give overall believability weightings to make a final decision. And so if it was just done on a pure vote, it might go one way, but when you apply the believability weightings of the team, it might go a totally different way.
So we'll put a link to the Ray Dalio stuff on the meeting.
At the beginning of the presentation, you said you were in the military and you had this helicopter team, and you said something like that every week you had a new team. Was this on purpose, or was this per mission, or was it
per mission? So the nature of Iraq and Afghanistan was that I was supporting lots of different special forces teams.
So all the people were always different people, because this would be a huge benefit. Usually,
it was
not about hierarchy; it's about if you have a legacy mindset. And people act in a certain way, and you cannot make them think in a different way, and it's just impossible. If you have always new people, you don't have that.
But and so that would be the ideal, that you would have diverse people in all the time. But then our human bias is if that's open and it's a whole load of new people. So it's all very nice us here today. But if we were all if all of us were charged with actually working together for the next 2 weeks to achieve some sort of outcome, we'd probably spend the first week working out where we all sit in the pecking order, and there's all those human things that you do and who's good at what, and we there's Tuckman, you end up going through the forming, storming, norming, performing phases and of teamwork, and what we're trying to do is give people technology that you can put a diverse group of people together and start performing straight away. Very quickly.
Just on the opposite of bias, do you find that balance is a problem? For example, the BBC is notorious for balancing crackpot with an expert so that they get equal time.
No, I would. That is a problem with our culture at the moment. That giving, it's a misconception that just because my opinion differs from someone else's, that's the problem with referenda. That's the problem with. We shouldn't necessarily be giving everyone an equal opportunity to make decisions. It should be based on expertise. But
we'll continue that discussion in the pub.
Yeah, that's a good
one. Kevin, you've been very persistent.
You don't need artificial intelligence to work out what to do with how to improve politics. You get rid of politicians. And I think that is what this world needs to really be seriously thinking about. Get rid of politicians. Use the process of sortition in order to take the big decisions for the greater good.
So there's a book called The End of Politicians by Brett Hennick.
Read it, it's open your mind.
Yeah, and so I cover Brett's ideas in my own book, The Transcending Politics, a few copies of which are outside. I think it's part of the answer. I don't want to get rid of politicians completely. I think they should be in a different environment. We are out of time. Great to keep talking, but it's unhealthy to sit down for too long. Does anybody absolutely desperately feel they've got the most important question? Right.
Very quick.
Yes?
How do you relate to emotional intelligence?
Oh yes, this is maybe this. Emotional intelligence is really important. Within teams of people to be able to realise when. But this is kind of when we're talking about ideas. When you're emotionally intelligent and you've got the best possible idea and it's just before the end of the meeting and you say, you know what, I'm not going to put this idea forward right now because we've sort of decided what we're going to do and then no, now's not the right time, so I won't put it in.
Emotional intelligence is sometimes helped by alcohol.
It is.
So what we're going to do in a few minutes, we have an option to get some physical exercise and move around, and we'll be gathering in a nearby pub. It's in the Royal National Hotel, so it's a new pub. We've only been there once before after our meetings, but it's last time we went there it was very quiet and we had a great conversation. In fact, some people stayed so long that they missed their last train home, and they ended up homeless for the night. So
they'll take them back down to the bottom of Maslow then.
Yes. So and the speaker was there till 11 o'clock as well. So I'm not saying you have to stay at 11. In fact, Joe, I fully understand if you can only stay with us a short while. So that's in the Royal National Hotel in Bedford Way. We'll say thanks to Joe in a minute. So just I'll put up some slides in a moment. I'll kick this thing back into live. It shows a few other events that's coming soon. 2 events on timetable for June. There might be an event happening in May too. I'm still trying to pin that down. You'll find out about it from the meetup page. There's copies of my book outside. I address at least some of these questions of collective intelligence. You can also get it online. And I want to ask you all to give a warm round of applause to Joe for being such a visual
Great. And thank you all. I really enjoyed it.